Shalom and welcome to It Takes a Village to Bring Mashiach as we continue with our podcasts. And today we're going to be looking at Judaism and socialism and how they compare. Kind of a review first. Capitalism claims to provide the solution by awarding those who work the hardest with greater profits, but is that really the case or the goal? And that's what we've talked about so far. In terms of the economics of what the village will look like. And we talked about the statistics that income distribution in the United States is moving with alarming speed into the hands of a few of the very wealthy elite. And again, all of this having to do with the idea that in the village that we're proposing, in the community that we're proposing, there needs to be an acceptance or recognition at least that the economic flow can't be from the bottom up. It has to be from the top down, from Hashem, from God, and then out. And that's the flow that we're going to be talking about today in terms of what Judaism teaches, what the Torah teaches at any rate. But so in order to prepare for all of that, we've discussed the problems with capitalism, and the idea that socialism as an economic theory, not as a political theory, but as an economic theory, is the closest that we have to the ideas of Torah. And we'll be expounding on that a little bit more, or a lot more, in this time together that we have. So we're going to examine the profound connections between Jewish ethical traditions and socialist principles. And then we're going to introduce a concept that might be new to many of you. The idea may not be new, but the name is probably new. It's what I've coined as Theocratic socialism, and name may not stick. It may not work exactly right. Maybe Yehuda ism or Yehuda socialism. I don't know. We'll look at that. But a vision, at any rate, that combines spiritual values with economic justice, that puts community at the center, that offers a path forward that honors both our material needs. I do not discount that we have material needs. And we also have a spiritual nature that has to be considered in all of that as well. So let's look at Judaism's prophetic call for economic justice. The relationship between Judaism and socialist philosophy represents one of the most fascinating intersections of ancient religious ethics and modern political economy. While the term socialism is distinctly modern, emerging from the 19th century European political discourse, the underlying principles of collective responsibility, wealth redistribution, economic justice, and social welfare have deep roots in Jewish religious literature spanning over 3 millennia or more. It's crucial to establish at the outset that Judaism does not advocate, and I don't want to be accused of saying this. There's nowhere in Torah that you're going to find anything that says socialism is good. But that's not the point. So Judaism doesn't advocate for socialism in the modern political sense, nor does it endorse any particular economic system wholesale. However, religious texts contain a very sophisticated framework of economic ethics that does what? Well, it prioritizes social justice, communal responsibility, and the protection of the vulnerable. This is primary. Principles that resonate strongly with socialist ideals, certainly much more strongly than with capitalist ideals. The Torah, prophets, writing, Talmudic literature collectively present a vision of society where private property exists alongside robust mechanisms for wealth redistribution, where individuals and individual enterprises operate within boundaries set by communal welfare, and where economic relationships are governed by moral imperatives rather than pure market forces. Now, having said that, I believe, perhaps without proof, that the chosen purpose of the children of Israel, well, there is proof to this, that the chosen purpose of the children of Israel was to teach the world. Now that part is understood. What I believe goes beyond that, to expand the idea of what we're supposed to teach the world, is that most Jews and Christians, if they're being honest, can agree that Jews were chosen to be the priests and therefore teachers of who God is. That is generally understood to mean teachers of all things spiritual. But I want to expand that idea. And I do this believing that it is natural to think of this idea in an expanded way. We are meant to teach the world the nature of God, who God is, and what our relationship with Him should be. Now, that goes far beyond just what is spiritual. That encompasses every aspect of life on this world. Many great rabbis, including Maimonides, Isaac Luria, the Gaon of Vilna, stressed the importance of rabbis learning and teaching science and math. And when I say rabbis here, please understand something else. I believe that it was specifically and essentially the tribe of Levi, the Levites, the priests, who were given the role of teachers. But since the destruction of the temple and kind of the dispersion of the tribes, and people not necessarily being tribal, and I believe that this will also change in the Messianic age, that every Jew has this responsibility, because there's plenty of proof that we can find that says that all Israel will be priests. Okay? So that's kind of, I just want to kind of get that basic idea out there to understand that this is what I'm talking about. And who today are the teachers? Well, those are the rabbis primarily. So whatever you think about rabbinic concepts and the teachings of the rabbis, they are the teachers. So they're the ones, again, going back to what some of the ancient prophets, ancient rabbis said and prophesied, that it is the importance of rabbis learning and teaching science and math that has to happen. Okay? We're going to expand that a little bit, but the reasoning behind this was profound. The Zohar, a book of mystical teachings published in the 13th century. Again, you may or may not like the thought of it, but in the Zohar, there claims to have actually been these prophecies that were given centuries before even the 13th century that prophesied this. It prophesied that the earth would be flooded with wisdom from above in the year 5600. Now that equates to the year 1840. Now think about that year, because as a reminder, this was the year that the Industrial Revolution is given to have started. So this prophecy from at least 600 years earlier becomes awe-inspiring when you think about its truth. I mean, again, there's no question. It wasn't that this was pretended to have been written 600 years earlier. I mean, it was already out there well before the Industrial Revolution. This prophecy existed. So some of these rabbis that I just spoke about, and others, drew from this the importance of those who are called to be priests and teachers of the world by God, to be the first ones to learn and teach this wisdom that was being poured out from heaven, to demonstrate why, what is the purpose, why was the Industrial Revolution, in its essence, why was the modern advancement in science and technology. Why do we say that was from God? Well, aside from the fact that everything is from God, it was given for a specific reason. However, what the rabbis feared is if this new knowledge were in the hands of men without faith, it would lead to a great time of apostasy. Why? Because it would not be associated with having come from God. And therefore, you would get these people that would be teaching this and working this and not understanding the spiritual connection. And what would end up happening is what exactly ended up happening. This is indeed what happened as science became the enemy of religion rather than its greatest proof. And there are so many teachings out there now that you can go back and you can look and you can see how this breakthrough in quantum physics, in string theory, all of these things have an origin in Judaism, in the teachings of mystical Judaism that have been out there long before science picked it up. So there's ample proof that everything that we have in science today has already been prepared. But since it's not being taught by the rabbi, since it's not being taught with the idea that this comes from God and the proof that it comes from God, then it begins to set up a situation that we have today where science says, this is all from me. I'm the one that came up with this idea. I did the research. I found this. We don't need God. We have me. I mean, really, this is science today, and it shouldn't be, because we don't need me. We need the source. So having said all of that, I don't think it's then too far a leap to recognize that these same rabbis should also have taught the ethics of economics to the world as well. And think about it. Could it be that this is why socialism drew in so many Jews, and so did communism, who recognized in its principles the type of economy they had recognized in Torah, even though many of these were not observant Jews that entered into the halls of socialism and communism. But still, they had that Jewish soul. They had the background from their families of what was being taught in Torah. They recognized it. But since it wasn't taught and promoted by the spiritual leaders, the rabbis, as it should have been, like science, it too became the enemy of religion. So my goal here is to prove that indeed the idea of economic fairness is clearly taught in the Torah. I don't even need to prove that. I'm sure you will know it, but I'm going to prove it anyway. It is taught in the Torah. It's taught in the Tanakh, which is the entire Bible, the Torah, the Navi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. That's what Tanakh stands for. It's taught as a fundamental ethical teaching of God. This is what God teaches. This is what God wants. The Jewish approach to economic justice is fundamentally theological. You can't separate the economy from the philosophy. In this, it's all the same. It begins with the premise that God is, and God is the creator, and therefore God is the ultimate owner of all resources. Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. So human beings are, therefore, according to Torah, stewards rather than owners of property. And this stewardship carries obligations toward the broader community. This theological foundation creates space for what might be termed religious socialism, a system where economic arrangements serve divine purposes of justice, compassion, and human dignity. Throughout Jewish history, these principles have manifested in various forms, from the agricultural laws of ancient Israel to the communal structures of medieval Jewish communities, from the ethical teachings of the prophets to the legal innovations of Talmudic rabbis, and from the socialist Bund movement of Eastern Europe to the kibbutz experiments in modern Israel. Now, what I want to do here is to trace all of this continuity, demonstrating how ancient Jewish texts anticipated many concerns of modern socialist thought while maintaining their distinctive religious character. So now I want to take you even deeper into history, because the connection between socialism and justice doesn't start in 19th century America or Europe. It goes back thousands of years to the ethical and legal traditions of Judaism. And understanding this connection is crucial, because it shows us that the socialist impulse, the drive toward economic equality and communal responsibility, isn't some modern invention or foreign ideology. It's rooted in ancient wisdom about human beings, how human beings should live together. So let's start with the Torah, the foundational text of Judaism. And what we find there is remarkable. A comprehensive system of laws designed to what? Designed to prevent the permanent concentration of wealth. It's there. And to ensure that everyone has access to the basic necessities of life. These aren't just nice suggestions. They're commandments presented as the will of God for how society should be organized. So, for instance, take the Jubilee year described in Leviticus 25. Now, every 50 years, this is a commandment. This is a commandment of God. Whether we follow it or not, it's still a commandment of God. Every 50 years, all land, every piece of land, was to be returned to its original family owners. All debts were to be forgiven. Now think about what this means. It's a built-in reset button for the economy. It prevents the permanent accumulation of land, the primary form of wealth in an agricultural society, in the hands of a few families. It recognizes that over time, through bad luck, bad decisions, or exploitation, some families will lose their land and fall into debt. And it says that's not acceptable. But it also says the land doesn't belong to you. No, but none of the land belongs to you. Even the families that get it back, the land doesn't belong to them. It was given to them. So every generation with this philosophy starts with a relatively level playing field. No permanent underclass, no permanent aristocracy. Every 50 years we reset. Now, 50 is a significant number, but again, if you think about it, 40 to 50 is considered a generation. So the idea here, as I just said, is that every generation gets a fresh start. Every generation gets a reset. The Torah explicitly frames this in terms of divine ownership. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity. I'm quoting now. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. Quoting God. Leviticus 25:23. So this theological principle undermines absolute property rights, establishing instead a system of long-term leases where the price of land was calculated based on the number of harvests remaining until the next Jubilee year. Again, going to Leviticus 25:15-16. And if 50 years seems too long, well, there's also the sabbatical year. Every 7th year, when debts were forgiven and the land was to lie fallow. Again, it's a periodic redistribution, a recognition that the economy needs regular correction to prevent runaway inequality. Here's an interesting side note, and I don't know if this is still true. This is several years ago. I was speaking with a bankruptcy lawyer, and he pointed this out to me, and I'd never thought about this before. Bankruptcy used to be allowed every 7 years. That's not a coincidence. So, in essence, bankruptcy was capitalism's way, I suppose, of introducing this idea of that kind of equality, of reset every 7 years. So then there are the gleaning laws. When you harvest your field, you're not supposed to go back for what you missed. When you harvest your vineyard, you're not supposed to strip it completely. You're supposed to leave the edges, the corners, the fallen fruit for the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger. This isn't charity in our modern sense. It's not the wealthy deciding to be generous. It's a legal right. It's a legal commandment. The poor have a right to glean. It's not something that we give to these poor people. No, it's their right. Again, the farmer does not own the land or the crops. He's just doing the work for the owner, and the owner is somewhere else. The owner is Hashem. So the land's abundance belongs to the owner, but the owner has said that the land's abundance belongs to the community. So consider the prohibition on charging interest to fellow Israelites. In Exodus 22:25, it says, "If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act toward them as a creditor, exact no interest from them." Why? Because money lending can become a tool of exploitation, a way to trap people in permanent debt. The Torah recognizes this and forbids it within the community. This prohibition fundamentally alters economic relationships. It prevents the accumulation of wealth through pure financial manipulation, requiring instead that profit comes from productive activity. It recognizes that charging interest on loans to the poor compounds their poverty, creating cycles of debt that can lead to bondage. Interestingly enough here as well, if you think about it, and this is a sad fact, the reason why you have the story of Shylock in Shakespeare is this very reason. Christians took this idea of not charging interest, and they said, okay, well, we can't charge interest, so we're going to turn our economic accumulation over to the Jews. Now, the Jews can't charge interest to other Jews, but they can charge interest to Gentiles. So this is where the Jews initially became known as the bankers. It was the only job they could have in many cases, so there was no choice. But money corrupts and can corrupt, and it did. But at any rate, but going back, interest shouldn't be charged to anyone, Jew or Gentile, and really that's the bottom line. The interest prohibition resonates with socialist critiques of finance capitalism, particularly the Marxist concept of fictitious capital, wealth that grows through financial instruments rather than productive labor. It also anticipates modern concerns about predatory lending, debt traps, and the financialization of the economy. And then there's tzedakah, from the Hebrew word tzaddik, which means righteous. Tzedakah is often translated as charity, but it is not in the sense that we think of charity. Its meaning is justice or righteousness. So in Jewish tradition, giving to those in need isn't optional generosity. It's not that. It's an obligation. It's a commandment. It's a matter of justice. The poor have a right to support from the community, and the wealthy have an obligation to provide it. And it's not, again, if we could just get this into the essence of our being and recognize it. We blame the poor for being poor. They don't work hard enough. They don't do this. They don't do that. They don't, And so those who are wealthy say, why should I give to these people? They don't do anything for me. But the point is that it is all God's. And even being poor, I mean, there are many possible reasons for it, but in essence, nothing happens without God's will. So when we denigrate the poor, we're denigrating God. And that is kind of the whole point and the whole reason why we have tzedakah, why we have the idea of charity. It's to teach us that these people are not out there, they're us. We are these people. So no matter how wealthy you are, in an instant you can lose everything and become the poor. There's no difference between you and anyone else. The only difference is if you have been given a pure amount, your duty as a steward of that money that was given to you is to then distribute it and enable it to get distributed to those in need. That's it. That's the goal. That's economy. That's what God's economy is about. It's not about you accumulating and becoming a billionaire or a trillionaire. That's totally against the economy of Torah. Doesn't mean you can't accumulate wealth. But the more you accumulate, the more responsibility, or as Spider-Man would say, that with great power comes great responsibility. With great wealth comes great responsibility. The poor have a right, and please hear this, they have a right to support from the community. And the wealthy have an obligation to provide it. That's where it's going to come from. It's going to come from you who have the money. I'm sorry, but if you feel like that's not your job, well, then you need to relook at the job description that Torah has for you. So giving charity, it's not about feeling good or being praised for your generosity. It's simply about fulfilling your duty in a just society. If you give 90% of your income, good. Nothing to be praised about. It's just your job to do it. Your blessing, because there is great reward, but it's still not something that you can boast about. You're just doing what you're supposed to do. It's also about recognizing that even poverty, and I can't stress this enough, poverty comes from God, not as a punishment. Sometimes it may be a debt that's being repaid, because Judaism does teach reincarnation, the idea that we come back to what the Eastern philosophy calls karma. We come back to work out our debts. But essentially, poverty is not a punishment from God. It's simply a way of enabling the wealthy to have the honor of helping his fellow. So now, as Jewish tradition develops through the Talmud and later rabbinic writings, these principles are elaborated and applied to new situations. The rabbis develop detailed laws about workers' rights. Employers must pay workers on time. They have to provide good working conditions. They can't exploit their power over those who depend on them for their livelihood. These are the laws about fair pricing, about not taking advantage of someone's ignorance or desperation. Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. There are laws requiring the community to provide for widows, for orphans, the sick, the elderly. It's all there. It's in the Torah. I'm not making this up. It's not a socialist propaganda piece. It's Torah law. So what emerges is a vision of economic life that prioritizes human dignity and communal responsibility over individual accumulation. Wealth isn't seen as something you create entirely on your own and therefore have an absolute right to. You didn't create money. You didn't create prosperity. And the proof of that is you can lose it just like that. You have no control because you are not the creator. Many people will probably take umbrage against that, but trust me, you are not the creator. So wealth and rights are something that come from God to the community, from the land to the community, from whatever source to the community. It carries obligations. You are a steward of wealth, not an absolute owner. And the purpose of economic activity isn't maximum profit. I'm sorry, again, as far as Torah is concerned. It's supporting human flourishing. Human flourishing. We're going to take a look at this in a minute, because the greatest form of charity is not giving a couple of bucks. The greatest form of charity is providing a livelihood for someone, setting someone on their feet well enough that they can now take care of themselves. So it supports human flourishing for everyone in the community. It's about recognizing the true flow of economics. In capitalism, the flow is from the bottom up. In socialism, the flow is outward. But even that's wrong, since the Torah teaches that the flow is from the top, from God down, and then out. Now, I want to be clear. Again, I'm not saying that Judaism is socialism. I just showed you the big difference between the two. And socialism is not Judaism, certainly. There's different traditions with different histories and contexts and all of that. There's not a connection in that context between the two. But what I am saying is that they share core values, the belief that economic inequality is a problem that needs to be actively addressed, that the community has responsibility for all of its members, that wealth carries obligations, that periodic redistribution is necessary to prevent permanent stratification, that human dignity matters more than property rights. Here's why this matters for our conversation. It means that the socialist impulse isn't foreign to Western religious tradition. It's not atheistic materialism, as the propaganda would have you believe. It's deeply connected to the prophetic tradition, to the call for justice that runs through the Hebrew Bible. When the prophet Isaiah says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow," unquote, that's not just individual morality. It's a call for social and economic structures that protect the vulnerable. When Amos thunders against those who, quote, trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth, unquote, he's not just criticizing individual greed, he's condemning an economic system that creates and perpetuates poverty. The Jewish ethical tradition gives a framework for thinking about socialism, not as a rejection of spiritual values, but as an expression of them. It shows us that you can have a system based on communal ownership and economic equality that's rooted in reverence for the divine, in recognition of human dignity as reflecting the image of God, in the understanding that we're all responsible for one another. The Talmud, the vast corpus of rabbinic discussion compiled between 200 and 500, let's say, of the Common Era, takes the Torah's economic principles and develops them into a sophisticated legal and ethical system. The rabbis faced the challenge of applying ancient agricultural laws to more complex urban economies in their innovations. These innovations demonstrate remarkable social consciousness. The Talmud establishes that every Jewish community must maintain organized systems for poverty relief. Two institutions are mandated: the kuppah, which is the community chest, a fund collected weekly from which the poor receive support for their weekly needs. Again, this is a Talmudic institution. The Mishnah, Peah 8:7, specifies, quote, "The kupa is collected by 2 people and distributed by 3. The requirement for multiple collectors and distributors prevents both embezzlement and arbitrary decision-making." And the tamchi, which is the soup kitchen, is a daily distribution of food for the hungry. Why? I guess, you look here in America, at least, not quite as true in Israel, but here in America, soup kitchens are generally not run by Jewish organizations. Why not? They should be. At any rate, Talmud establishes this for Jewish communities, a daily distribution of food for the hungry. Unlike the kupa, which served only local residents who had lived in the community for at least 30 days, the tamchi was available to any hungry person immediately. The Talmud, Baba Batra 8b, rules that residents of a city can compel each other to contribute to these funds. The residents of a city may compel one another to build a synagogue, to buy a Torah scroll, and to purchase books of the prophets in writing. They may also compel one another to contribute to charity. This representation, now think about this. It's a form of mandatory taxation for social welfare, a striking precedent, I should say, for modern welfare states. So when you're complaining about your taxes, and one of the other arguments against democratic socialism is their tax rates are so high. But if you think about it, I'm sorry, but taxes are nothing more than a way for you to give tzedakah. Your taxes are your tzedakah. Now, sadly, oftentimes your tax money is misused, but the primary purpose for taxes is what? It's to provide for the common welfare. It's to provide the social systems. It's to provide all of the systems that the government is supposed to be doing for the benefit of society. So if you think about it, your tax, you're giving, most of us are giving about 30%. Good. That's very good. It's more than the 10%. You can count your blessings for that. By the time it gets through the government, it's probably down to 10% or less. But the point is that taxation is no more than that. It is the same thing that was done in these Jewish communities, the shtetls, where there was a commandment to give for various social programs. Moses Maimonides Ramban wrote the Mishnah Torah, completed it in about 1180, represents the most comprehensive codification of Jewish law ever produced by a single author. Now, his sections, and again, you can agree with what he says or you cannot agree with what he says, but where he draws together from the Talmud, I don't see how anyone can disagree with him. He doesn't give too much. I may have to take that statement back, but primarily the Mishnah Torah is a compilation of the laws of the Talmud put together in a way that makes sense, that's easy to read. Okay, it's not about Maimonides telling you what to do. It's what the Talmud has and the oral law has told you what to do. Okay, but at any rate, so this is his claim to fame. So his sections on charity, Hilkot Matanot Anyim, and loans, Hilkot Malvei Vilove, systemized centuries of Talmudic discussion. He synthesized Talmudic teachings on charity into his famous 8 levels of tzedakah. That's in the Mishnah Torah, Hilkot Metanot Aniyim, chapter 10, verses 7 through 14. So here's what he had to say. The lowest form of charity, level 8, giving begrudgingly. Still a form of charity, still tzedakah, but it's at the lowest level. Level 7, giving less than one should, but giving cheerfully. Level 6, giving after being asked. Level 5, giving before being asked. Level 4, giving when the recipient knows the donor's identity, but the donor doesn't know the recipient's identity. You have to think about that one for a little bit. Level 3, giving when the donor knows the recipient's identity, but the recipient doesn't know the donor's identity. And level 2 is, of course, a combination of the last two we looked at, giving when neither party knows the other's identity. And the highest level, level 1, is giving a loan, interest-free, forming a partnership, providing employment, or otherwise helping the person become self-sufficient. So this hierarchy reveals sophisticated ethical thinking. The highest form of charity isn't giving at all. It's creating conditions where giving becomes unnecessary. Teach a person to fish. This anticipates modern socialist emphasis on structural solutions to poverty rather than mere palliative charity. Maimonides writes, quote, "The greatest level above which there is no greater is to support a fellow Jew by endowing him with a gift or loan, or entering into a partnership with him, or finding employment for him in order to strengthen his hand until he need no longer be dependent upon others," unquote. So again, this is, before anyone critiques this, yes, this is talking about a fellow Jew. But this is a basic idea of morality. And Gentiles should do this for one another. And there are ample evidences in Torah that Jews are also required to take care of non-Jews in many situations. So the emphasis on anonymity in the middle levels addresses the psychological dynamics of charity, protecting the recipient's dignity while preventing the donor from developing pride or seeking honor through giving. Maimonides emphasizes that tzedakah is not optional. Quote, "We have never seen or heard of a Jewish community that does not have a charity fund," unquote. He rules that even a poor person receiving charity must give charity to others. The poor are not exempt, maintaining the principle that everyone participates in the system of mutual support. He also addresses the psychology of giving. One who gives charity to a poor person with a sour expression and with his face turned toward the ground, even if he gives him 1,000 gold pieces, loses his merit and forfeits it. Rather, he should give him with a pleasant countenance and with joy, and commiserate with him over his troubles," unquote. Maimonides' philosophical work, The Guide for the Perplexed, addresses economic ethics from a different angle. He argues that excessive wealth pursuit corrupts character, distracts from intellectual and spiritual development. This critique of materialism resonates with socialist concerns about capitalism's psychological effects. Let's take a look at some structural approaches. So beyond addressing existing poverty, the Talmud emphasizes preventing it. The Mishnah, Avot 2:2, states, quote, "Excellent is the study of Torah together with a worldly occupation, for the exertion in both makes one forget sin. All Torah study that is not accompanied by work will ultimately be nullified and will lead to sin," unquote. This principle that everyone should have productive work reflects concern for both economic security and human dignity. The rabbis themselves typically practice trades alongside their scholarship, modeling the integration of intellectual and manual labor. And to be sure, in modern times, there have been rabbinic changes in minor ways to this, so that one who is attending yeshiva, one who is working in the position of a rabbi, can charge for that. But again, the basic idea is that that there has to be work involved. It can't just be sitting around studying all day. I mean, that's the idea. Okay, there are exceptions, of course, but that's the basic idea for most of us. The Talmud also discusses inheritance laws that prevent wealth concentration. While primogeniture was common in ancient societies, Jewish law divided estates among all sons, not just the firstborn. The firstborn received a double portion. Daughters inherited when there were no sons, and this prevented the accumulation of vast estates across generations. So what is the Talmudic vision of economic justice? The Talmudic rabbis created this comprehensive system of economic ethics that balanced individual rights with communal responsibility, that recognized market forces while imposing moral limits, and that addressed both immediate poverty relief and structural prevention. Their innovations, mandatory community taxation for welfare, price controls, workers' rights, and emphasis on economic self-sufficiency anticipate many features of modern social democracy. The Talmud's approach differs from modern socialism in important ways. It accepts private property as legitimate. It doesn't advocate for worker ownership of production means, and it operates within a religious rather than materialist framework. Yet its insistence that economic arrangements serve human welfare, that the community can compel contributions for the common good, and that preventing poverty is a collective responsibility, creates significant common ground with socialist principles. Let's take a look at Nachmanides, the Ramban. He was born 1194 to 1270. He emphasized that biblical commandments contain both explicit requirements and implicit principles. In his commentary on Deuteronomy 6:18, quote, "And you shall do what is right and good in the eyes of the Lord," unquote, he argues that the Torah cannot specify every ethical requirement, so it commands general righteousness that extends beyond specific laws. The principles of going beyond the letter of the law create space for expanding social obligations as circumstances change. Nachmanides writes, quote, "At first the Torah stated that you should observe his statutes and testimonies which he commanded you, and now it states that even regarding that which he did not command you, you should also take heed to do the good and right in his eyes, for he loves the good and the right," unquote. Now, this interpretive approach allows Jewish law to address new forms of economic injustice not explicitly mentioned in ancient texts, providing flexibility for responding to changing economic conditions. So, how did these change? What were the practical implementations of them? Medieval Jewish communities, Kehilot, developed a sophisticated governance structure that implemented Talmudic economic principles. Community councils, kahal, had authority to levy taxes for communal needs, including poverty relief, to regulate markets and set maximum prices for essential goods, to establish guilds that controlled entry into trades, provide interest-free loans through communal loan funds, Gemilut Chasadim, maintain hospitals, orphanages, and other social services, ransom captives, considered one of the highest charitable obligations. Again, why? Why should you care? Someone was captured, that was their own fault. No, we don't view it that way. And of course, we see this recently in what happened with Hamas on October 7th, and the whole issue of those who were captured. Communities' power to tax and regulate was extensive. The principle of the community can compel allowed majority decisions to bind all members. This created a form of democratic socialism within Jewish communities where collective decisions about resource distribution were enforceable. The Hekdesh, the communal fund, supported various social services. Wealthy community members were expected to contribute substantially, with social pressure and religious obligation ensuring compliance. Those who refused could face sanctions, including exclusion from communal honors and, in extreme cases, excommunication. So now we come to the heart of what I want to propose to you. Theocratic socialism. And I know that term might sound strange and might even sound contradictory. Theocratic, ruled by God or religious principles, and socialism, communal or other ownership and economic equality. So how do these fit together? So let me start by saying that theocratic socialism is not a call for religious authorities to control the government. It's not about imposing religious law in a diverse society. It's not theocracy in the sense of Iran or medieval Europe. So why use the term at all? Because what I'm proposing is a form of socialism that's rooted in spiritual values, that recognizes the divine spark in every human being, that sees economic justice as a sacred calling, not just a political program. It's socialism that learns from the failures of purely materialistic socialism, the Soviet model, the Maoist model, which tries to build a just society while denying the spiritual dimension of human existence. These experiments failed, and one reason they failed is that they had no transcendent values to prevent the corruption of power, no spiritual foundation to sustain people through difficulty, no sense of sacred purpose beyond material redistribution. Theocratic socialism draws on the prophetic tradition we talked about earlier, the tradition of Isaiah and Amos and Micah, who called for justice not as a political preference but as the will of God. It draws on Torah's vision of periodic economic reset, of communal responsibility, of wealth as stewardship rather than absolute ownership. It draws on Jesus' teachings about the poor, about the dangers of wealth, about the kingdom of God as a place where the last are first and the first are last. It draws on the long tradition of Christian communalism, from the early church in Acts sharing all things in common, to the monastic communities, to the Anabaptists and the Quakers who tried to live out radical economic equality. But it's not just about religious tradition. It's about recognizing that human beings are not just economic units, not just consumers, not just workers. We're spiritual beings with a need for meaning, for connection, for transcendence. A purely materialistic socialism that ignores this will always be incomplete. We need an economic system that serves our material needs and a spiritual framework that gives our lives meaning and direction. And here's the key. Theocratic socialism is community-based. It's not about taking over the national government and imposing a system from the top down. That would be nice, but it's not about that. It's about people coming together in intentional communities, villages, not cities, to live out these values on a human scale. It's about demonstrating that another way is possible, that people can live together in economic equality and spiritual purpose, that we can create pockets of sanity and justice in a world gone mad with greed. Why villages can do these things is that they're not cities, because cities are products of industrial capitalism designed to concentrate labor for factories and to create markets for mass consumption. Cities are where we become anonymous, where community breaks down, where we're isolated even in the midst of crowds. Villages, small, intentional communities, are where we can know each other, where we can make decisions together, where we can hold each other accountable, where we can create genuine solidarity. Think about the kibbutz movement in Israel, which we'll explore more in future discussions. These were communities based on socialist principles: communal ownership, equal distribution, collective decision-making, but also rooted in Jewish identity and values. In some cases, they were not religious, but in some they were. At their best, they demonstrated that people could live together in economic equality, that work could be meaningful and shared. that children could be raised communally, not necessarily apart from their families, but raised communally, that culture and spirituality could flourish without private property. They weren't perfect. No human institution is, but they proved it could be done. Theocratic socialism says, we can do this. We can create communities where everyone contributes according to their ability and receives according to their need, where decisions are made collectively, where leadership is service rather than domination, where wealth is shared rather than hoarded, where we work not for profit but for the good of the community, where we have time for prayer, for study, for art, for relationships, for rest, for Shabbat, where children are raised in security and love, where the elderly are honored and cared for, where the sick and disabled are supported without question. And these communities can be rooted in spiritual practice, not necessarily all the same religion, but a shared commitment to transcendent values, to the sacred worth of every person, to the belief that we're accountable to something beyond ourselves. This spiritual foundation does several crucial things. First, it provides motivation beyond self-interest. Pure self-interest leads to capitalism. Theocratic socialism says we're motivated by love, by justice, by obedience to divine will, by the desire to reflect God's image in how we treat each other. Second, it provides a check on the corruption of power. One reason political socialism failed is that it concentrated power in the state without any transcendent accountability. Leaders became tyrants because there was nothing above them to answer to. In theocratic socialism, everyone, including leaders, is accountable to God, to spiritual principles that can't be manipulated for personal gain. Third, it provides meaning and purpose beyond material comfort. We're not just trying to make sure everyone has enough stuff. We're trying to create communities where people can flourish spiritually, where life has meaning, where we're connected to something larger than ourselves. Fourth, it provides the resilience to sustain the community through difficulty. Any alternative community will face challenges, economic pressure, social opposition, internal conflicts. A purely political commitment might not be enough to hold people together, but a spiritual commitment, a sense of sacred purpose, can sustain people through hardship. Now, what does this look like practically? It means communities where land and major resources are held in common, not privately owned. Work is shared according to ability, with everyone contributing at their level. Distribution is based on need, not on how much you can grab. Decisions are made collectively, with everyone having a voice. Leadership is a rotational and accountable, not permanent situation, and nor is it privileged. Children are raised with communal support, not just by isolated nuclear families. Again, not taking away from the families, but communal support. Education available to everyone, focused on developing the whole person. Healthcare, communal responsibility, not a commodity. The elderly are honored and cared for, not warehoused or abandoned. Spiritual practice is central, with time for prayer, study, reflection. Art and culture are valued, not just economic productivity. The natural world is respected and cared for, not exploited. Hospitality is practiced with openness to those in need. Conflict is addressed through restorative justice, not punishment. Success is measured by human flourishing, not by GDP. This is the vision. I know some of you are thinking that sounds nice, but it's utopian. It's not realistic. Human nature won't allow it, but here's what I want to say to that. We've been told that capitalism is realistic, that greed is just human nature, that competition is inevitable, but that's propaganda. Human beings are capable of extraordinary cooperation, generosity, and love. We see it in families, in friendships, in communities that come together in crisis. Think of 9/11, what happened here in America. We came together. The question isn't whether we're capable of it. We're clearly capable of it. The question is whether we'll create systems that encourage our better nature or our worse nature. Capitalism encourages greed, competition, selfishness. It rewards those who exploit others and punishes those who are generous. It tells us just how things are. That's human nature. But what if we created systems that encouraged cooperation, generosity, and love? What if we rewarded people for for contributing to the common good rather than for accumulating private wealth? What if we structured our communities to bring out the best in us rather than the worst? For me, that's what theocratic socialism offers. It's not a perfect system. There's no perfect system until Mashiach repairs our natures. But it's a system that aligns with our deepest values, that honors both our material needs and our spiritual nature, that recognizes we're made for community and not just for competition. So let me bring this all together as we wrap this up. What have we learned so far? We've learned that capitalism, despite its promises, has evolved into a system that concentrates wealth and power in fewer and fewer hands while the majority struggle. We've learned that this isn't what Adam Smith envisioned. It's not inevitable. It's a choice we've made or that's been made for us. We've learned that socialism isn't a foreign ideology or a totalitarian nightmare. It's an economic system, plain and simple, based on communal ownership, democratic control. It has deep roots in American history and values. Woodrow Wilson recognized that democracy and socialism share the belief that power belongs to the people. Eugene Debs and millions of Americans in the early 20th century fought for socialist principles because they aligned with American ideals of equality and justice. We've learned that the socialist impulse goes back even further to the ancient Jewish tradition with its Jubilee years, its gleaning laws, its prohibition on interest, its understanding of wealth as stewardship and communal responsibility. The prophetic call for justice isn't just about individual morality, it's about creating economic structures that prevent exploitation and ensure dignity for all. We've learned from Oscar Wilde that socialism isn't just about conformity, it's about liberation. It's about creating conditions where everyone can truly be an individual, can discover and develop their unique gifts. They have the time to do it. They have the space to do it. They can live rather than merely exist. It's about recognizing that to be is more important than to have. And finally, we've been introduced to theocratic socialism, a vision that synthesizes democratic ideals, socialist economics, Jewish ethical tradition, and spiritual foundation. It's community-based, starting with small intentional villages rather than trying to take over national governments. It's rooted in transcendent values that provide motivation, accountability, meaning, resilience. It's practical and visionary, realistic about human imperfection, but hopeful about human potential. This is the path forward I'm proposing. Not a violent revolution, not a political takeover, but a peaceful demonstration that another way is possible. We start by creating communities that live out these values, that show the world that economic justice and spiritual purpose, what it looks like in practice. We become the change that we want to see. We build a new world in the shell of the old. Will it be easy? No. Will everyone join us? No. Will we face opposition? Absolutely. But will it be worth it? Will it be more aligned with our deepest values than the system we have now? Will it offer hope for a better future? I believe the answer to that is yes. The system we have now is failing most of us. It's destroying our communities, our environment, our souls. It's making a few people obscenely wealthy while millions struggle. It's telling us that this is just how things are. There's no alternative. But that's a lie. There are alternatives. There have always been alternatives. And one of those alternatives is community, is the village using theocratic socialism as a way of organizing our economic lives that honors both our material needs and our spiritual nature, that creates genuine community rather than isolated competition, that pursues justice as a sacred calling. So I'll leave you with this question. What kind of world do you want to live in? What kind of world do you want your children to inherit? A world where a few have everything and most have little? A world where we're all competing against each other, where your gain is my loss? A world where we're defined by what we own rather than who we are? Or a world where we take care of each other, where everyone has enough, where we're free to become who we're meant to be, where economic life reflects our highest values rather than our basest instincts? The choice is yours. The time is now. The path forward, in my mind, theocratic socialism, not as a distant dream, but as a present possibility, waiting for us to have the courage to build it, enabling an opportunity and a space for Mashiach to come. So we'll talk more next time. about what this might actually look like in practice, about the kibbutz movement and other successful experiments in communal living, about how we can start building these communities right now. We'll also talk about a man who is at the heart of these ideas, Martin Buber. Until then, this is Tom of Erna, for it takes a village to bring Mashiach. Shalom.